Good afternoon. My name is John Strope. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag History Lecture Series. Lectures are held monthly on the third Thursday in the auditorium at the Nebraska History Museum at 15th and P Street in Lincoln. The programs have a live audience, are taped by City TV 5, are broadcasts on government access channels in Lincoln, Omaha, Bellevue, Hastings, North Platte, Grand Island, Papillion, South Sioux City, and Beatrice, and are posted on YouTube. A detailed schedule for this series, as well as information about all of the Society's programs and services, can be found on the Society's website at www.nebraskahistory.org. If you are not already a member, I encourage you to join. Benefits of membership include subscriptions to Nebraska History Magazine and the Society's newsletter, use of a microfilm reader printer in the Society's library archives to make free copies from microfilm, free admission to the Society's 7 historic sites, discounts in the Society's landmark stores at the History Museum, the State Capitol, and Chimney Rock, and reduced fees for kids' classes and for other activities that are sponsored by the Historical Society for which there's an admission fee. For example, last fall they did a bike tour of Eastridge here in Lincoln. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for the financial support which allows us to tape and broadcast programs on public access television across the state and on the Society's YouTube webpage. To find that page, just type into your browser www.youtube.com/user/Nebraska Historical. There are almost 150 past brown bags on YouTube. Our speakers today are Laura Mooney, Curator of Museum Collections, Cindy Drake, Librarian, Nebraska History Library, Karen Keehr, Curator of Photographs, and Paul Eisloeffel, Curator of Audiovisual Collections. Collectively, our speakers have nearly 75 years of experience working with the collections of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Their topic is Celebrating Statehood with Treasures from the Collections. As we gear up for celebrating Nebraska's sesquicentennial in 2017, collections curators from the Society look back at the state's centennial celebration of 1967. Through artifacts, photographs, publications, and motion pictures, they will take you back 50 years to Nebraska's last big anniversary. Just to let you know about asking questions, our speakers prefer you wait until the very end. Please join me in welcoming Laura, Cindy, Karen, and Paul.
Thanks, John. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm Laura Mooney. I am the curator for the museum collection here at the Historical Society. And we're so glad you joined us. Traditionally, the Historical Society's curatorial staff has given the December Brown Bag Lecture and focused on things that we call treasures from our collections. This year we thought we'd focus it in a little bit more and talk about our centennial celebrations 50 years ago. We thought because we're so close to 2017 that it would be really fun to look back 50 years as we prepare for our 150th birthday this next year. So with that, I'm going to talk about our museum collection, which I work with. And here at the Historical Society, our museum collections are very wide-ranging. We have artwork, we have textiles, and three-dimensional artifacts of all types. We have about 135,000 artifacts. And we have a lot of souvenirs from the Centennial. So I'm going to show you a few of those today. Commemoratives and souvenirs for the Centennial included everything from pocket squares to ashtrays, wooden nickels. There were also ties, hats, decals, coloring books, bumper stickers, paper bonnets. I could really go on and on. There's really a wide variety of things that were produced, and we have a lot of that material in our collections here. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus on just a few today, starting with the commemorative medals. And there were actually 5 different variations of the medal that were produced for the Centennial. The initial financial backing for the medals was provided by the Nebraska Bankers Association, and the medals were sold at Nebraska banks. This is an example of the silver Centennial medal. These were about 1.75 inches in diameter, and they each had a serial number. They issued 10,000 of these medals, and they sold for about $11. The medal designer was a University of Nebraska art professor named David Saylor, and you can see here that the design features a pioneer who is planting a cottonwood tree, and that was to honor Arbor Day in our state. On the tree there is a small meadowlark, and goldenrod is also visible. And then to the right is the Freeman log cabin, symbolizing the Homestead Act. And the tree towering above the cabin is an American elm tree. In the background, you can just very faintly see Chimney Rock and the Sand Hills. And then around the outside of the medal are arrowheads that are honoring Native Americans in Nebraska. And then on the reverse side, you can see there the state capitol. The quote is by Walt Whitman and is a quote from Leaves of Grass. So there were also several different bronze versions of the medal. There was an 1.75 inch version that was very similar to the silver medal. It sold for $3.50 at the time, and they made 5,000 of those. A slightly larger one that I've pictured here was sold for about $5, and they produced 3,000 of those. And then there was a small version that they sold for $1, and 49,300 of those were issued. So there are a lot of Centennial medals that were produced that year. None of the bronze versions are serial numbered. And then finally, there was a very limited edition of a platinum medal. They only issued 37 copies of those, and we have one in our collection here. There were also a couple of different firearms that were produced the Centennial year. This is a Winchester Model 94 30-30 rifle, and it was manufactured as a special Nebraska Centennial issue. They made 2,500 of these, and they sold for $100 each. They were only sold in Nebraska, but the Centennial Commission reported in their final report that they were becoming quite popular, and collectors from outside the state were anxious to acquire them as well. And then there was also a Colt .45 replica revolver that was produced. This will also say Nebraska Centennial and have the dates marked on the barrel. They produced 7,000 of those, and they were sold nationwide by Colt Firearms. One of my favorite Centennial collections that we have relates to the stamp. During the Centennial year, a U.S. postage stamp was also issued, and the image is of a bull and an ear of corn. These symbols were chosen because of Nebraska's economic base at the time. And the Centennial Commission actually solicited designs from various artists to produce ideas for the stamp. And they ultimately selected an artist named Julian K. Billings of Omaha for the design. At that time, he was vice president and executive director at Savage Dow Incorporated, an Omaha advertising firm. And we're lucky to have a great collection of some of his preliminary drawings and sketches that he presented to the Centennial Commission, and just different ideas that he came up with. So it's really fun to take a look at these and see the different ideas that were presented and where the stamp design ultimately went from these. So the state steel of Nebraska was one idea. He also considered Nebraska National Guard themes. And then many different versions of the state capitol. So I just thought I'd show you a few of those. And here are a few more. And eventually the Centennial Commission decided that they really wanted to have both a cow and corn on the stamp. So he did a lot of variations of that idea. So different orientations of the stamp, different colors of cows. And here are some more. And then here is the final design on a first day issue cover. The first day of the stamp was issued was July 29th, and the Centennial Commission was really pleased with this project. They said there was an effort for Nebraskans to mail a million first day cover envelopes that first day, and they stated that that was accomplished on that day. And then the last artifact I thought I'd show you today is a centennial dress and a matching bonnet. Nebraskans celebrated the centennial in a wide variety of ways that year, including parades and pageants, and by dressing up in pioneer clothing. And this particular dress was made by Dorothy Herman and was worn to celebrate the centennial. And we have this dress currently on display here in the museum. So if you'd like to see it in person, please go up to the second floor of the Nebraska History Museum, and you'll be able to see it in person there. And that will conclude my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn things over to Paul Eisloeffel next, and he'll talk about our moving images collection.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Eisloeffel, and I work with the Moving Images and Sound Recording Collections here at the State Historical Society. Now, as I searched for audio visuals that had to do with the state centennial in '67, I naturally gravitated toward the collections of local television news film that we have, knowing that these would be the richest in event-oriented content. And I found quite a bit. The parades that Laura mentioned, centennial babies, beard growing contests, all of these things were in the local, shown on local television on the news. But in the interest of time, I narrowed it down to two things to share with you today, and here they are. The first event actually didn't take place in 1967, but the year before, in July and August of 1966. Now, you've probably all heard of the Nebraska Navy. It's an honorary organization to which virtually anyone can belong. It's known for having no rank but admiral and no vessels. Well, in 1966, it did have a vessel, the SS Centennial, and it was really no more than a pontoon raft with a makeshift log cabin built on top of it. It was launched on the Missouri River at Omaha and undertook a nearly 1,700-mile journey, goodwill journey, down the Missouri and the Mississippi to New Orleans. Its mission was to make all ports of call necessary to spread the word of the Nebraska Centennial in 1967. Hold on, I'll get this working. There we go. Here you see it being lowered into the Missouri River in Omaha. This is from KOLN television news footage. Maxine Morrison is christening it here with a bottle of milk, probably because all of the crew were below drinking age at the time. Here they are in their uniforms as goodwill ambassadors of Nebraska. You see the seal there in the front of the craft. The first stop was in Falls City, but here they are in Kansas City. And in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. When they finally reached New Orleans, they were greeted by a local television reporter, which you'll see in a moment here. Having a little trouble with his land legs, I think.
This is Kirk Maloss on WDSU-TV, and we're at the foot of Canal Street Wharf, talking to two of the gentlemen that were on the, what's the name of the ship, fellas?
SS Centennial.
And how long did it take to come from Nebraska down here to the city?
This is the 28th day of the voyage.
28 days. How many miles did you fellas travel?
1,680 miles.
And go ahead and tell me, what happened on that voyage?
Well, we've had quite a few experiences. This last week, we've had fog, we've run at night, we've hit a sandbar. We were in what people down here call Louisiana white rain. We couldn't see anything, almost got hit by lightning. And this last week's really been a climax to a real interesting voyage.
So an epic journey to be sure. As to what happened with the craft afterwards, I have no idea. I don't know if anyone here can offer any advice on that. Well, next we have some excerpts from a television special that was aired on KOLN again in March of 1967. It was a live show, and you'd think, well, if it's live, how do we even have a copy of it? Well, the way they made copies of live shows back then was that they would shoot a film camera at a television monitor and just keep that rolling, and therefore that would record the show. This was called a kinescope, and it resulted in the waviness and the graininess that you'll see in the clips. Now, the program was called The Hour of Gladness, and it was sponsored by the Nebraska Council of Churches. You'll find out more about it as you watch the clip.
It is written, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with song and praise." Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Nebraska's own Henry Fonda.
you, ladies and gentlemen. It's always good to come over. This special hour of the religious fine arts is presented by the Nebraska Council of Churches, a gift from the churches of Nebraska to the people of Nebraska on the occasion of the state's centennial. During the next 60 minutes, you will hear the fine voice of Nebraska's own Joe Feeney. You will hear the words of Mari Sandos and see the story of the state's religious heritage. And you will hear the glad sounds of great hymns as arranged by Harry Simeon and performed by a chorus and orchestra of Nebraskans. A time for remembering our religious heritage. An hour of gladness. As we said, all the members of the chorus and the orchestra are native Nebraskans, and so are the other participants, with one notable exception. And that exception is the man at the podium, who's not only conducting the chorus and orchestra, but who's arranged or composed the music for this program. He hails from New York, but we're going to fix that up right now. Harry Simeon, come here. You ready? Ready. At all times and at all places, you don't have to repeat this, you just have to believe it. At all times and at all places, you got that? All right. You will acknowledge that the state of Nebraska is the heart of the nation. Heart of the nation. Is truly where the West begins. West begins. It's the agricultural center of the world. You better believe it. I believe it. I believe it. Is the beef state. Is the home of the nationally rated Cornhusker football team. Oh, I knew that. And has the most cordial and hospitable, the warmest, friendliest, most sincere group of citizens ever put together in one place at one time in the world. And you believe that? I believe that. Therefore, I am authorized to declare you an honorary citizen of the great state of Nebraska and inform you that you won't have to pay any taxes while you're here.
Those, of course, are only excerpts from an entire hour-long show. If you'd like to watch the entire hour of gladness, you can find it on the Historical Society's YouTube channel, or you can go to YouTube and just search for Hour of Gladness Nebraska, and you'll find it there and watch the whole thing. I wish I could show you more clips that I found. Perhaps at a later date I will, but thank you for letting me show you these. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I had not seen any of those before, and that was certainly something I would like to see further at some point. I'm Cindy Drake. I'm librarian of the Nebraska History Library, located at the headquarters building of the Historical Society. Now that Paul has reviewed the audiovisual collection pertaining to the Nebraska Centennial, I will familiarize you with the published state and local history material produced to celebrate statehood in Nebraska before and after the Centennial in 1967. The Nebraska Centennial in 1967 was not the first centennial that Nebraska celebrated with published histories. Although there were titles published in the state before 1876, the nation's centennial was one of the first times that there was a concentrated effort to compile the history of individual counties in Nebraska. This came about because of a joint resolution by the Senate and House of Representatives of the U.S. Congress on March 13, 1876, and that they recommended the counties and towns celebrate the nation's centennial by preparing a historical sketch of said county or town from its formation, and that a copy of said sketch may be filed in print or manuscript in the clerk's office of said county. They also asked that one copy be filed in the office of the Librarian of Congress. Archaeologist John Ludwigson and I have taken an interest in locating these 1876 county histories during our almost 40 years as colleagues at the Nebraska State Historical Society. John compiled a listing years ago of the county histories we had located for at least 38 of the Nebraska counties that existed in 1876. These histories were printed as pamphlet booklets, manuscript versions in the county records, or other formats. These histories were usually the basis for the county history section used in Andrea's History of Nebraska, that was the first major state history published in 1882. Various state, county, and community histories were published in Nebraska before and after the early 1900s. These histories published before 1945 were well documented in an article titled Local Nebraska History, a Bibliography, compiled by Myrtle D. Berry for Nebraska History in 1945. The first centennial celebration for Nebraska was in 1954, that marked the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the Territory of Nebraska. On page 26 of the Centennial Handbook, published by the Commission, they encouraged the civic organizations to publish the history of their town or city. This was the Nebraska Territorial Historical Commission. Most communities may have printed histories in their newspapers or other sources, but few local history books were published except for those communities such as Nebraska City and Tacoma that were actually celebrating the centennial of the founding of their community in either 1854 or 1855. 13 years later, Nebraska celebrated its official statehood centennial. The final report documented the various activities that occurred in the state to celebrate Nebraska's statehood. Publishing material regarding the Nebraska statehood centennial was in various genres. There was an official history titled Nebraska, a pictorial history, that was published on the state level. Dozens of other histories were produced during the centennial span about the settlement of the state in general, including this Nebraska yearbook. A couple other titles relating to the centennial theme were Nebraska Centennial Literary Map and Guide to Nebraska Authors and the Nebraska Centennial First Ladies Cookbooks. Many counties and towns wrote their own histories. It was estimated that 40 to 50 histories were written in the state as a result of the centennial spirit. Again, these may have been in different formats, varying from the Nuckolls County history titled From Hoppers to Copters, to the community history of Ewing. It appears that the Centennial Commission from 1967 used the 1954 Centennial Handbook as a guidebook to encouraging various activities across the state, since many of the activities outlined in that handbook were reported to have taken place in 1967. One of those activities was county and community celebrations. Dakota County and the community of Bennett were just two of dozens of localities in the state that hosted multi-day programs to celebrate the centennial. Their activities were recorded in a booklet for Dakota County and a program for Bennett. Between 1954 and into the turn of the century, communities across the state celebrated their centennials, and most published their own individual histories about their community. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the Historical Society maintained in-house listings of these local histories, as well as cataloging them individually for the Nebraska History Library. Many of these same counties and communities published histories again during the nation's bicentennial in 1976. The last official book published that included a listing of over 95% of all the local histories compiled in Nebraska during its entire history was in 1986, when Sylvia Nemo published her reference guide titled Nebraska Local History and Genealogy Reference Guide. Today I can report that since shortly before and after the turn of this century, dozens of communities have again celebrated their founding by producing histories to mainly honor their 125th birthdays. As a native Nebraskan, I do remember celebrating the centennial in 1967, since I was a fourth grader in a small country school in southern Cass County. One of our projects was to compile a history scrapbook to celebrate the centennial. I still have that scrapbook, and the major focus of it is the historical booklet produced by the School of Journalism to celebrate the centennial. It was a supplement to at least 15 newspapers in the state. I know that my mother also made me a pioneer dress, and that we celebrated the centennial in our school, as well as my hometown. I also have a photograph of my mother's club who posed for a photograph in which they were all wearing their centennial bonnets. And from that photograph reference, I will turn the podium over to Karen, our curator of photographs.
Hi, my name is Karen Keehr, and I am the photograph curator here at the State Historical Society. And thank you for coming in and watching our program today. I think you're going to find out that my favorite subject in school was show and tell. My best subject. So I'm going to show you some photos from the Centennial celebrations that we talked about from across the state. Excuse me. So this is a great photograph of I'm sorry, I forgot what band it is. The Sydney High School band went out to the Rose Parade to kick off the celebration and kick off the Centennial in 1966. I love their uniforms. It had to be hot. So Lincoln had a parade celebration as well. These images were taken by the Nebraska Centennial Commission and is part of our government records. I have several of these. So this is they're here on O Street, 11th and O Street. I can make that disappear so you can see a little bit better. And these photographs are important not only because they're great parade photos celebrating the Centennial, but they are one of my few photos of O Street in 1967. So we had these digitized because I always have questions about photos from the later part of the years, and we really don't have very many in the collection. So it's nice to see these fun ones here. A great picture of the Plum Creek Riders from Dawson County. Did you? I'm sorry, somebody just said that they rode a horse in the parade, so that's kind of cool. So this is the Nebraska Latvians. They are Americans by choice. Here again on O Street. I should probably be looking at my notes as I talk. And of course, what parade in Nebraska wouldn't be complete without a buffalo hunt? It's pretty cool because they've made it look like a bronze. This is from the Holt County, Smith's department store in Holt County. So Cindy had mentioned the Bennett Parade. So this is some great images from Bennett, Nebraska's parade in celebration of the Centennial, which I'm sure was mentioned in the booklet. I like the caddy with the, I think it's with the horns on it. Very classy. And then we have the marching band. And then these little cuties too. I don't know who they are, but I like his mustache. He's very handsome. And I could go on, but really all I have for the 67 celebration are more parade photos. So I actually decided to be a rebel and not follow directions, which is pretty typical for me. So I'm actually going to talk to you about photos from 1867, because we're pretty lucky to have a fairly good collection of images from early Nebraska. What I love about this map, it very clearly shows why I have very few photos from western Nebraska. There's nothing out there, or there's very little out there. And to take a photograph during this time took a lot of equipment, and it took if you were doing it outdoors, it took a train car, or it took a big wagon, because you had to travel with your whole darkroom. And they were big, heavy cameras on these big, wet plates, and you traveled with chemicals and glass, and it wasn't easy. So that's why all my photos I'm most of the photos I'm going to show you are actually from, I'm trying to decide if there's a pointer on this. I do. So there's very little out here, but there's lots over here. Lots of stuff going on over here in eastern Nebraska.
So we are fairly lucky that we do have photographs by some of the early Western photographers. Men like Charles Savage was hired by the Union Pacific Railroad to go out and take photos of the West. The idea was that people out in the East would jump on these trains, specifically Union Pacific trains, and come out here and vacation or even move out to the West. So they took these incredible views, which you can go actually see the original carte de visite of this on display right now on the second floor here at this Historical Society, and understand how vast and open and beautiful Nebraska was. Here is O'Fallon's Bluff in 1867. He worked with a Savage, he did settle briefly in Nebraska, but then moved to Salt Lake City to follow he was a Mormon and he was active in the church. So he did settle out in the Salt Lake City area, but he did take some really incredible photographs of wagon trains and Mormon trains, and we're really lucky to have so many of his wonderful images. His partner, Ottlinger, drew this, and I think it beautifully illustrates the changes coming to the West. This was published in Harper's Weekly in 1867. So that's what people in Nebraska in 1867 was experiencing, that progress was being made, that the Pony Express was being replaced by those telegraph wires, and how we communicated and how we traveled were changing. And we were becoming a modern state. I also have a really beautiful photograph album from early Omaha. So I have some photos for you from early Omaha, 1867. So this is what Omaha looked like from Douglas and 18th Street in Omaha. Isn't that crazy? We're looking east towards the river. It's not quite the same view today. It's actually fun to look these up on Google Maps and look at it. This next one, I can make that disappear so you can get a better, clearer picture of that. I love all the dirt roads. Can you imagine Omaha with dirt roads? So this is taken from South 11th Street. And South 11th Street would have been basically, Omaha basically ended at Pierce Street. So we're looking here, I think this is from like Coons Park. So looking north. So here is looking some 17th and Farnham. And here is 18th and Dodge. Again, not very far out of town. This is 11th and Pacific Street. So here we are standing in the middle of Prairie, what is now downtown Omaha. This is a great picture. So this is taken looking west toward on Dodge and 15th Street. This over here, anybody know what this is over here in the distance? It is the Territorial Capital, correct, Paul? Yep. So that's the Territorial Capital, and that's what it would have looked like in 1867 before it was moved to Lincoln. I like the dapper gentleman here with his top hat. Can everybody see him? He's very handsome. And don't we have the finial for this? Or is that on the other Capitol? Other Capitol, okay, thank you. I don't know if anybody's ever seen I love this postcard. I'm not even sure when this postcard was produced, but it shows all of the capitals in Nebraska, and it's always fun to trick people and ask them how many capitals have Nebraska had, because the answer is 2 territorial and 3 state capitals. Everybody forgets about the early one because it was only around for a very, very short time before it had to be replaced because it was far too small. We have lots of photographs and artifacts online, and I encourage you to go and explore them and have some fun looking at them. And if you have photos from Lincoln or from Nebraska in the 1860s or 1960s, we would love to talk to you too. So I'd like to open it up for questions. Yep. You're asking about how to find the YouTube. If you just go to our website, nebraskahistory.org, you'll be able to find a link to our YouTube channel, and then from there, you'll be able to look at all of our wonderful clips that Paul has put online.
Thank you.
Including all the past brown bags.
Yeah, all the past brown bags are online as well.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Based on what you've been looking at in the archives, what do you think will be different about this upcoming celebration versus the 67?
The question is, what do we think is going to be different looking from in the collection versus 1967 versus 2016 or 2017? I think a lot of things are going to be a lot more digital images, digital recordings, and that is a challenge to preserve in itself. So we're looking into ways to doing that. Cindy?
I certainly expect that there's not going to be as many printed histories as we did in 1960, as there were in 1967 and then, mainly because the ones that have been printed and because of the expense. You probably will find more of them online, and then I will have to go copy them on archival paper to put in the library.
Yeah, I agree with Karen on the digital aspect. I know that one thing that the Sesquicentennial Commission is doing, one of the projects they're doing is kind of an oral history collection called I Am Nebraska, and it invites people to just upload something off their phone as the camera to just speak about, what they like about Nebraska and what it means to them. Now we're making efforts to work with them to preserve those, but it's all going to be digital, so it will be a challenge in the future, as it is with all digital materials, how to preserve these things and make them useful in the future.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to comment again about the parade in Lincoln. We had a comment from one of our individuals here about that he was in that parade. What caught my attention was about the Latvian float, because that gives another tie to the State Historical Society, because one of our early artists, Herb Thomas, he was from Latvia. So I'm sure he was a member of that group.
One thing I wanted to point out in regard to the audiovisual collections is that during the state centennial and a couple of years to either side, just about everybody with an agenda came out with a film that they would, give out to the school districts and community groups to show. I know one of them is, one that we have is Nebraska, Land of Grass, by the Grass Commission. And so really, they're terrific about showing their own, something about Nebraska's history and its look at the time and that sort of thing, but they also have their promotional agenda involved. One of those films has one of my favorite titles of any film in our collection, and that is Mixing Brains with Ink. And that was made by the Educational Commission, or the Department of Education. Any other questions? We have just a little more time.
So of those 4 fellows on that U.S. Centennial, whatever happened to them?
The guys that were on the Centennial, the USS Centennial, I don't know what happened to them. I believe they were all students at the time at various universities throughout the state. I'm not sure what's happened to them. No, I'm sorry. Yes, one more question.
On the Bennett celebration,
Mm-hmm.
they had a poster that said Goober was going to be the guest.
Yes, I noticed that too.
I
Yeah.
wondered, did he have Nebraska ties or particular reason?
Yes, I just happened to look at that again. That she was asking about the goober that was mentioned on the Bennett item that I put up. That was from the Gomer pile.
Yeah. Mayberry.
Mayberry.
Yeah,
Mayberry, yes.
Andy Griffith Show.
Andy Griffith Show. I couldn't think of it quick enough. Yes, but that's who it was from. That he was a visitor there at Bennett that day for the parade. So.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, and we'll see you sometime soon.